Okay, hi guys. So this is a quick video about how to use these cameras in aperture priority. So the camera is a Canon 200D. It is a digital SLR, which just means that it has a glass prism inside here, which reflects light through the lens and out the viewfinder, which means it doesn't take up a lot of battery to show you what the camera is about to take a photo of, which I like. Couple of general things about the camera. Make sure when you're using it, you've got your wrist wrapped around the lanyard, or the lanyard wrapped around your wrist, sorry. Make sure you're gentle with the camera when you're changing battery or memory card. So the way that we change the battery and memory card is we open this chute at the bottom here. You can change the battery by pulling this light grey tab, and then the battery will slide out. When you put it in, there's a couple of prongs here, just make sure they line up. It doesn't really matter if you try to put it in the wrong way, because if you're gentle with it, you won't do any damage to the camera. The memory card you release by just gently pressing this memory card here, and then taking it out, and you can put it back in. Similar thing with the memory card. If you put it in the wrong way, don't worry about it. Just make sure you don't force it so that you don't do any damage to the camera. So when we first switch the camera on, we want to think about which shooting mode we're going to be using. In our case, we're going to be using aperture priority, which is AV. So whichever mode is pointed to this little dash right here, that's the mode that the camera is set to. Aperture priority is aperture is your most important priority. It's your key thing that you're worried about, which means, so you've got your finger here on the shutter release button here, and then there's a click wheel just behind the shutter release. This is the control that you have the most access to. So when you're in aperture priority, that means that this click wheel is going to control aperture most of the time. That's what's most important to you, and that's the control that you have the quickest access to. So you're going to control two main things in aperture priority: the aperture, which you control by spinning this click wheel here. And remember, the aperture is measured in f numbers. So f4.5, you want to think of it as a fraction. The lower the number, the bigger the hole in the front of the camera. And the higher the number, the smaller the hole in front of the camera. So f4.5 is going to, or 1 over 4.5 is going to be way bigger than 1 over 22, for instance. So the second thing that you control is the exposure compensation meter, which is this meter right here. And that meter will basically tell the camera how dark or light you want that photo. So normally this click wheel will control the aperture, but if you hold this AV button right here with the plus minus symbol on it, you can see a little yellow settings wheel, or little yellow click wheel thing comes up next to the exposure meter. If you turn the click wheel to the left, it's going to take a darker photo. If you leave it around the middle, it's going to take a middle photo. And if you turn it to the right, it's going to take a brighter photo. Most of the time, you're going to want it around the middle or just a little bit higher, so it takes, a fairly bright photo. But, you don't want it to be, usually you don't want it in the extremes unless something weird's going on. But we can talk about those different cases at another time. So you're controlling basically the aperture and how dark and light you want the photo to be. The camera should be controlling everything else. The shutter speed, that rocks up just here, and usually it's a fraction. So if I half press this shutter release, you can see it previews the shutter speed it's going to use. It says there 1/60th or 1/80th. That's about as slow a shutter speed as the camera can use without there being blur in the photo. Shutter speed's really easy. You always want the fastest one that you can get away with. The second thing the camera controls is the ISO, or how sensitive the camera is to light. So ISO is up here. And once again, if we half press the shutter release, the number changes because the camera is telling us what ISO it's going to use. We want that set to auto. If you ever want to change it, you can just press the ISO button just here behind the click wheel, and then you can change the ISO to whatever you want. The lower it is, the clearer the photo, but the less sensitive the camera is to light, so the longer it's going to take to make the photo. As I said, most of the time, you're going to want it set to auto so the camera can do that for you. So really, you've just got two things to worry about: the aperture, how wide you want it, and most of the time you're going to leave that really wide, and how dark or light you want the photo, this exposure compensation meter. I really hate that name. I prefer to just think of it as dark light meter. To the left, it's dark, and to the right, it's light. So with your camera looking like this, you're all set up to go. We should talk a little bit about some of the stuff going on the back screen. Most of it you won't need to adjust. It's all going to be fine on auto for you. Maybe the one thing that might cause you a few hassles in the future is this L down here. So if you press the Q or set button, you can toggle around and change different things on the back of the camera. if you press that, what you're going to get is the type of image that your camera is going to take. So a RAW file is like a really, really large file where the camera gets the raw information, and then it gives you a lot of leeway to edit your photos later. But for most of what you guys are doing, you probably just want to leave it on a large JPEG. A JPEG is like a flattened file that has a bit less leeway to edit later, but is a lot simpler for your computers to handle and for the different software you guys are going to use. Maybe the last thing, or one of the last things we should talk about is the focus. So you always want to focus the camera before you take a photo, and you should hear a little beep right before you take the photo, and that means that your camera is focusing. So if your camera is not focusing, it may be that it's set to manual focus instead of autofocus. The manual focus autofocus switch for these older cameras is on the lens. On our newer cameras, it's going to be on the back of the camera, but that's another story. But yeah, so I think that should be pretty much everything. So yeah, happy shooting, make really good photos. For most of you, the settings that I've got on the screen right now, f4.5, around the middle on this exposure meter are going to be perfect. But yeah, if you need to change something, we'll figure that out when the time comes. Catch ya, bye.